The CIA under fire. The agency's director, John Brennan, has just given an extremely rare press conference defending the organization but also admitting mistakes in the wake of this week's devastating Senate report on CIA torture during the Bush administration.
As I have already noted, the CIA was unprepared to conduct a detention and interrogation program, and our officers inadequately developed and monitored its initial activities. The agency failed to establish quickly the operational guidelines needed to govern the entire effort. In a limited number of cases, agency officers used interrogation techniques that had not been authorized, were abhorrent, and rightly should be repudiated by all. And we fell short when it came to holding some officers accountable for their mistakes.
Now, all of this after a 5-year investigation using millions of internal CIA documents and memos, which concluded that the CIA deliberately deceived Congress. John Brennan denied deceiving the White House and the American public, that the CIA used interrogation methods that were much more brutal than the agency ever let on. And crucially, the report found that not a single case of torture led to information about an imminent threat to America, the so-called ticking time bomb justification. My next guest led efforts within the U.S. Defense Department to try to end coercive interrogation tactics at Guantanamo Bay. In an extremely rare interview, Alberto Mora joins me now live from our Washington bureau. Alberto Mora, welcome to the program. Good to see you today on all days. Do you, considering the deep resistance that you led, feel justified today?
Yes, I think, and first of all, thank you, Christiane, for having me on. I'm glad to be here. I think this is a happy period for the United States, paradoxically, because it demonstrates the self-righting nature of American democracy to examine our past, our recent past, our mistakes, and take corrective action. So this is what we're seeing, notwithstanding the awful wreckage that we've seen evidenced in the Senate torture report.
The director, John Brennan, went to great lengths, again, to raise the specter of the terrible day, the terrible hours after 9/11, saying, as almost explaining the fear and the panic and the herd mentality that led to these directions, praising the CIA for most of its work, but calling some of these interrogation methods abhorrent. You were there, and you tried to raise a stink. Tell me how and when you discovered this and what you tried to do about it.
Well, the director is right. That was exactly the atmosphere at the time. We were angry, we were afraid, we were discombobulated. When I learned about the cruel interrogation techniques that were being applied in Guantanamo, I instantly recognized that the authorizations for those enhanced interrogations, as they're called euphemistically, could lead to torture. And now, as you know from the Senate report, did lead to torture. I protested against the adoption of those authorizations and the application of those techniques, and was supported in that by every military lawyer I came into contact with and all the senior leadership in the military services who were involved in this issue.
Except, Alberto, the military brass rejected your arguments, and the torture memos were, in fact, authorized.
Well, no, the military brass didn't make those judgments. This was Secretary Rumsfeld and his team within the Pentagon that promulgated those memoranda within the department. But the members of the Joint Staff with which I spoke, and every military officer, in fact, that I came into contact with over 4 years on this issue, all felt that these interrogation techniques were contrary to American values and principles, contrary to American law, and harmful to us from a national security standpoint.
Can I play for you a piece of John Brennan's testimony just now in his press conference? Because there is still a slight disconnect between what he is saying. Did these torture, or as he says, enhanced interrogation technique, lead to useful information? I want to play this and have you explain for us.
Our reviews indicate that the detention and interrogation program produced useful intelligence that helped the United States thwart attack plans, capture terrorists, and save lives. But let me be clear. We have not concluded that it was the use of EITs within that program that allowed us to obtain useful information from detainees subjected to them. The cause and effect relationship between the use of EITs and useful information subsequently provided by the detainee is, in my view, unknowable.
Your comment on that, what is he saying?
Christiane, I'm not sure that I know what he's saying. It seems slightly incoherent. I think the net result is that the information produced by the torture was not effective in producing actionable intelligence. But on the other hand, he also seems to support it as having had some value. I'm not clear what he's saying with that statement.
And certainly we've had other members of the U.S. defense, certainly the head of the prosecutions at Guantanamo Bay, who told me this week that they weren't useful. They didn't produce a single shred of useful information. And as John Brennan was speaking, Senator Feinstein, who's responsible for this report, has been tweeting saying, CIA says, quote, unknowable. If we could have gotten the intel other ways, study shows it is knowable. CIA had info before torture. Alberto Mora, you're a lawyer. You are steeped in the legal process. What happens to these people who are named in this report? The DOJ says it's not pursuing any legal or criminal cases. President Obama wants to look forward, not back. What happens?
Well, Christiane, you know, that question leads me to reflect again on what a different place we'd be in today if the Department of Justice had not performed so abominably and abdicated its professional responsibilities to the country, to the president, to the agencies, and had provided quality legal advice on these kinds of issues. There wouldn't be the confusion that is evident in Director Brennan's comments, nor would we be we would not have entered into the torture programs that the nation entered into. What's important to consider now going forward is that the issue is not so much an issue about what happens to the CIA or to these individuals, but the larger issue is what is in the national interest. And the national interest, in light of this program and this recent history, is to reflect again on our principles, our values, our laws, our legal system, our constitutional order, our foreign policy and national security strategies. And all of that suggests that what we should do as a first order of business is restore our belief and our adherence to our traditional values, our adherence to the standard law on this issue, not engage in cruelty, not engage in torture, seek to hold those accountable for exceeding the legal guidelines provided, hold them to task, and then restore American leadership at home and abroad on this very important legal and human rights issue.
Alberto Mora, I guess I want to ask you the brutal question. The CIA now has been held up twice, at least twice, since 9/11 for failing on the job. The weapons of mass destruction and the bad intelligence that led to a catastrophic war in Iraq, and now this, which have grievously damaged this country. Is there any reason to believe that we can now move forward, as John Brennan said, that we're trying to put a full stop on this, acknowledge our mistakes, acknowledge our strengths, and move forward? Could this happen again?
Well, it could happen again. And in fact, although there were some laudable aspects to Director Brennan's comments, there were also some troubling aspects to his comments. The most troubling is that he fails to recognize that in defending our country, we defend both our people, of course, but also our values. And this is the second aspect of something that seemed to be absent from the director's calculations or from the CIA's calculations in engaging in this program. The second aspect that is troublesome is the director's refusal to use the word torture at all in describing what occurred. Any individual who is familiar with or would have a comic book familiarity with being shackled to a dungeon for a week would understand that that tactic, out of many, is classically torture. And unless the director is able to understand what the law and our values categorize this behavior as, then he's going to have to be told, or we're going to have to find a new director in order to lead this agency, because we need to be very clear about what the law and our principles require and how we classify these activities going forward.
And you know, there's been a lot of confusion and controversy over whether President Bush knew and when did he know that these torture, harsh treatments were being used. Did he know? You were there at the very beginning. Could he not have known?
Well, he might not have known, and it's unclear because the president, of course, has endorsed all these matters and has indicated repeatedly, both during his time as president and then after his presidency, that he supported entirely these programs. However, the information contained in the Senate torture report indicates that he may not have been informed as to the details of this program, and it could be that he simply ordered his subordinates to act aggressively, but by the same token, he also ordered them to act in compliance with the law. So I'm not clear at this point what the President Bush knew or didn't know concerning the details of the program.
Alberto Mora, one of the first people who stood up and challenged this process back in 2002. We appreciate you being with us here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Christiane.